من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا وحبيبنا محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Apologize for the delay. The computer was just not working in our favor, but alhamdulillah, after some juhd, inshallah, we got the alhamdulillah. Okay, so let us continue our final class of the Salahuddin series. Before we get into it, I'd like to hear just a recap from you guys regarding last week's lesson and also the week before. What do you guys remember? What have we covered so far? Where are we in the story right now? Who wants to go first? Brothers and sisters? Sisters? Who will volunteer? Sisters on the side. What did you guys cover last week? I wasn't here. Tell me about Salahuddin. His name is Yusuf. What else? Brothers? Anything to add? It's Kurdish? Yes? Anything about his qualities? His upbringing? What was his influences? Who was here last week, or am I just talking to a new audience? Okay, sister.
My takeaway from last week was he was really talking about the fact that there were people around Salahuddin who had raised him and nurtured him and planted the seed to create the Salahuddin. And I think that was the main message of last week's talk.
Yeah, okay.
And they're talking about like the establishments they set up and the fact that we have many mentors and that we should be trying to do that within our communities as well. And that Salahuddin wasn't cancelled for anything he did in his past, in his youth. He attained, he did Tawbah, and he created, like he became Salahuddin, and no one went, oh, you did that in your youth, and therefore we're going to cancel you. It was very much about like cultivating spaces for young people.
Excellent. Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much. Okay, I think a very, very apt summary of last week's class, and I think it sets us up very well for now, this week's finale and this week's conclusion. So just to venture through the very first class, very, very, very quickly. So we started off with, okay, never mind. No, it's still in the, yeah. It's just when you move closer to it, then it works. Okay, nonetheless, we will I will continue verbally. So we started off by providing a bit of context into the world of Salahuddin, or rather the world before Salahuddin's arrival. What were the different politics that were going on in the Muslim world, outside of the Muslim world, specifically in Western Europe. We discussed the rise of the Crusader sentiment, how the ruling Christian elites created quite literally a fake narrative which they then utilized as a weapon of propaganda to galvanize their people into marching towards Jerusalem. And of these things that they were telling their people is that our fellow Christians are being killed by these Muslims. And the fact of the matter is that the Christians were becoming afraid of the ever-growing presence of the Muslims, specifically with the Seljuk incursions into European lands. There were a number of defeats of the Byzantine Empire, and so a lot of the Western Europeans at the time, the French and the Germans and perhaps even a bit of the British as well, they became a little bit worried that if these Seljuks/Muslims keep on winning, they're going to come to us and they're going to make us all Muslims, they're going to convert us all to Islam. And they were slowly, at this point, moving out of their dark ages and towards a bit more of a civilized society. So they stopped their infighting amongst each other, and once they stopped their infighting, they then thought to themselves, okay, we still have a lot of this rage, we still have a lot of this aggression, where do we turn it towards? We can't turn it towards other Christians, so let's turn it towards these Saracens. And eventually Pope Urban II, who was the main figure who riled up this anti-Arab/Muslim sentiment of his time, gives a speech to a huge crowd of French elite and noblemen, as well as the common man as well, where he once again stirs up their emotions and eventually concludes that we need to march to the Holy Lands and we need to restore the honor of Christendom. We need to restore the honor of Christendom, and we need to reclaim the birthplace of our Lord, was what they would say, Jesus. And so they marched in 1097. They started and they began to conquer one city after another. And at this time, we also discussed the Muslim world was in disarray themselves. There was a number of infighting between different Muslim states, different Muslim rulers. Everyone was kind of out for themselves. Nobody was wanting to work for the greater good of Islam. Everybody just wanted to increase their own power. They wanted to increase their influence. And so, as a result, you had the caliph in Baghdad, the Abbasid caliph, who in his own state, he was not you could say, he was not the actual ruler. There was the Buyids that we spoke about that were actually in charge of the entire area of Baghdad and the surrounding areas. And we discussed four or five of the different territories and that were under the control of different various Shia groups. Eventually, like I said, the Crusades happen, and this kind of catches the Muslim world by surprise. They were not ready for it. And the historians, when they're writing about this, they would mention that previously, like during the quote-unquote golden era of Islam, Muslim intelligence and the intelligence of the caliphate at the time and the Muslim rulers was so advanced that, small conversations in Europe, they would be able to know when an attack was coming onto Muslim lands. So they would be able to mobilize before things would even happen. But at this particular instant, in this particular era of the Crusades, or just before the Crusades, because of the infighting and the lack of ambition to protect Muslim lands and to be true defenders of the territories of Muslim rule, they were caught off guard. And this allowed the Crusaders to essentially take city after city and commit massacre after massacre. And we read some of these horrific descriptions of where the Crusaders ran out of food and they began to eat the dead Muslims there. And they began to eat the children that were there as well, and they were roasting it. And these were very vivid descriptions. And then eventually they came to the Holy Land, they came to the land of Jerusalem, and once they entered in, they wreaked havoc. The streets were filled with blood, and it was described by chroniclers at the time that as the horses were walking in the streets, they were walking knee-deep in the blood of Saracens. And there were also horrific descriptions of Jewish people that were living in the city, and they sought refuge in their synagogue. And the Crusaders went into the synagogue, or rather around the synagogue, and set it to fire, killing and burning all the Jews inside. And they went even as far as to kill some of the Christians that were there as well. So the very people that they sought to defend and fight in the name of, they were killing them as well. And those that they did not kill, they ended up torturing as well to get certain information from them, certain things from them. So not a very pleasant experience at all. We then discussed some of the early resistance that took place. So this caught the entire Muslim world by surprise, that something of this nature happened. And then small acts of resistance began to come about. They were not particularly successful, but it did revive the spirit of jihad, and it did revive the spirit of fighting against those who sought to harm and extinguish the light of Islam. Eventually, a few decades passed, and then an unexpected figure in the form of Imad-ad-Din Zenki comes along, and he unites his small part that he had of Syria, and he eventually encroaches upon Crusader territory, and he takes one of the 4 Crusader strongholds. Do you guys remember what the 4 Crusader strongholds were, what the 4 cities were? What were one of them? Sorry? Edessa, okay, yes. Number 1 was number 2. Antioch. Number 3? Tripoli, yes. And number 4, the easiest one? Jerusalem. Excellent. Okay, so these were the 4. Is it working? No, it's not. Okay. If you can, please try. So those are the four principalities of the Crusaders, the four strongholds of the Crusaders. So Imad ad-Din takes back this territory, and this sends a positive shockwave through the Muslims that, oh my God, we actually defeated the Crusaders, and we defeated them in one of their strongholds. That means we can achieve one piece of victory, the others are now possible as well. And this was after decades of much loss. Imad ad-Din, however, passes away 2 years after this conquering of Edessa, and then he passes his reigns off to his son Nur ad-Din az-Zenki, with whom we will start with today, inshallah. So we went over some of his qualities, his noble and excellent qualities, his devotion to his prayer, his devotion to the scholars, his love and devotion of the poor as well. There was an incident in where they were seemingly running out of money to fund the army. And at the time, he was giving a lot of stipends to the poor and to the scholars as well. And so some of his advisors around him said, why don't you redirect some of this charity that you're giving to the poor and you give it towards the army? To which he reprimanded them, and he very strongly scolded them, and he said that it is because of the poor and it is because of the du'as of the scholars that I am giving my charity towards, that we are achieving any sort of victory that we have so far achieved. And so if I deprive them of this right, or if I deprive them of this charity, then I would deprive myself of victory. I would deprive myself of their du'as. And so we must not neglect our poor, and we must not neglect our scholars. So his devotion to the scholars, his devotion and his love of learning the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he would set up institutions. He would set up madrasas all throughout the lands of Syria and the lands of Iraq that were under his control. And he set up educational institutions where the idea of recapturing Jerusalem and fighting against those who sought to extinguish the light of Islam, this idea was being taught and reinforced into the students there. Why? So this sentiment of resistance remained amongst the Muslim psyche, that they did not forget about the importance of retaking back the Holy Lands. And then obviously last week we then spoke about Salahuddin and his different characteristics. I will talk about Salahuddin in just a moment, but let us get back to Nur ad-Din. So Nur ad-Din comes into power of Aleppo. He becomes the Sultan of Aleppo in 541 after Hijri, or 1146 CE. He takes over Aleppo, and he then tries to expand his power. So the first place that he goes to is Damascus. He goes to Damascus, and he doesn't immediately take over Damascus, because the rule of Damascus was he had a bit of power and influence. He doesn't immediately take it over. He plays the long game. And over a period of approximately 4 to 5 years, he has a camp set up outside of Damascus, and he occasionally, visits it. He sends his advisors into the city to try and increase his influence. And it is over these 4 to 5 years that his advisors begin being more influential upon the ruler of Damascus, to the point where he then gets his advisors to start sowing discord amongst the ruling class of Damascus. So people stop trusting each other. Eventually, this comes to a big moment in which some people are executed wrongly by the ruler of Damascus, and Nur ad-Din sees this as his opportunity to make his way into the city. And so it is said that he sends one person inside of the city to try and open the gates, and he's met with no resistance, because there was so much injustice being done by the ruler of Damascus that the people were fed up. And they knew Nur ad-Din was outside, and that if he were to come in, he would settle things and he would make things fair. So he sends one person inside of the city who throws a rope over, allows more people to come in. They open the gate of Damascus. Nur ad-Din walks in without any resistance. And one of the people that were very key and detrimental into helping him obtain Damascus was none other than Najm ad-Din, the father of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. So Salahuddin at this time was still a very young boy. So this taking over of Damascus occurs in 549 after Hijrah or 1154 CE. So Syria is now by and large under the control of the land of Syria, is now by and large under the control of the Zengid Empire, under the control of Nur ad-Din. And he has the support of Najm ad-Din, the father of Salahuddin, as well as the very brilliant military commander who is the brother of Najm ad-Din, the uncle of Salahuddin. His name is Shirkuh. And now they seek to expand their influence beyond the lands of Syria as well. Remember, the prize and the eye, what the eye has the prize on, the prize in which Nur ad-Din is trying to obtain is Jerusalem. But you can't just obtain Jerusalem by Syria. You need to surround the area around Jerusalem. And so this includes now the lands of Egypt. Now we discussed who was ruling Egypt at the time. What was the caliphate that was ruling Egypt at the time? The Fatimids, okay? The Fatimids. The Fatimids themselves were also having a lot of discord amongst them as well. There was a lot of infighting. And there is an incident in which a military general, he holds a banquet, and he invites 70 of the top and senior officials of the Fatimid Caliphate. He invites them to this dinner. And amongst them is the Grand Vizier, what we would basically call like the Prime Minister of the Caliphate. And his name was Shawar. His name was Shawar. This military general, he holds this banquet with the 70 officials, and in this one night, he executes all of them. And he does this so that he can obviously obtain power. And once again, the Prime Minister of the Caliphate was there as well, and so you get rid of the Prime Minister. Now you're basically second in command, because then the only person above you is the Caliph himself. However, Shawar eventually, or somehow, he manages to escape. He manages to escape, and he runs from the lands of Egypt, and he makes his way to Damascus, and he appears in front of the court of Nur ad-Din, where he asks for his help. And he's asking him that, that this has happened, and if you help me, then I'm obviously going to help you. One of the things about Egypt is that Egypt had very fertile land, and it was a potential source of income for both the Nur ad-Din, who was eyeing it, as well as the Franks, the Crusaders as well. So Egypt was a very sought after place. Because you have Egypt, and you basically have unlimited income, and you can sell its crops, and you can sell its resources, and you can fund your army, and then you can go and pillage whatever you want to pillage. So Nur ad-Din, when Shawar comes to him, Nur ad-Din sees this as an opportunity. He sees this as an opportunity to finally make some type of incursion and some type of inroads into Egypt. So he agrees to Shawar, and he says that, sure, I will help you, but what I want in return is 1/3 of the grain revenue from whatever you sell. I want 1/3 of the grain revenue from whatever you sell if we are successful in restoring you back to your position. So that's what Shawar was asking for. He was saying, I need you to come with me to Egypt, or to send people with me to Egypt, so that we can restore my position in the government, and we can take away any type of resistance that is going on in the Fatimid Caliphate. So Nur ad-Din eventually agrees, and he sends 2 people with Shawar. One of them being Shirkuh, and another one of them being the young Yusuf ibn Ayyub, aka Salahuddin. So Salahuddin is approximately 26 years old at this time, right? Very much in his youth, still finding his feet, still trying to find out where he fits into all of this, but he is sent to accompany his uncle. So Shirkuh and Salahuddin make their way to Egypt, and within 4 days, upon arrival to Cairo, they dispose of Shawar's enemies, and they restore Shawar to his position. Now once this happens, Shirkuh, who was obviously the one in charge from Nur ad-Din's delegation, he doesn't really want to leave. Okay? He doesn't really want to leave. Why? Because finally they're here. They have an army with them as well. If we leave now, then we came here we didn't achieve any type of progress. We just helped the Fatimids with one of their own internal matters, that this did nothing for us. So he wanted to stay there. Shawar, however, having his wish fulfilled, and then kind of understanding, all right, these guys aren't leaving, let me ask them to leave. They're still not leaving. Okay, we have a bit of an issue now. What do we do? So Shawar essentially stabs Shirkuh in the back. And he does this by reaching out to the king of Jerusalem. He ends up reaching out to the Crusaders to help him against Nur-ad-Din / Shirkuh. He reaches out to them and he says to them that you guys are obviously at odds with these people, and they're trying to take over Egypt, and if they're successful in taking over Egypt, then they're going to be a pain for you. So help me, help you. All right? We push back Shirkuh, we push back Nur-ad-Din, they don't get Egypt, you guys can keep your kingdom, we keep our kingdom here. So skeptically, but nonetheless they agree. The Crusaders agree to helping out Shawar. Well, now what ends up happening is the Crusaders then make their way to Egypt. And they don't take over Egypt, but you could say that they take over the security of Egypt. Okay? So in a way, they are charged. They do take charge, but it's not fully in charge, right? You still have the Caliph, and Shawar still has some type of power and influence as well. But they're still very much present in Cairo. And they are very much oppressive, and they are very harsh with the population of Cairo and the population of Egypt in which that they were a part of. Eventually, upon the arrival of the Crusaders to Egypt, this pushes Shirkuh and Salahuddin outside of the main areas that they were previously in. So they're still in Egypt, they're just not in like the main city centers or the like. And obviously they've done this to protect themselves from being completely destroyed by the Crusaders. Eventually, the Crusaders' appetite for power and control is no longer controllable. And they make their intentions of taking over Egypt very clear to Shawar and to the Fatimids. And so they make this clear, and eventually Shawar tries to come to some type of negotiation with them, that I will give you something to the extent of 1 million dinar. Okay, I'll give you 1 million dinar, just stop what you're doing, consider going back as well. And I can't give it to you now, I'll give you some now, and I'll give you some later, but I'll give this to you. So eventually the Crusaders agreed to this. To cut the long story short, once again, Nur-ad-Din commands Shirkuh and Salahuddin, who is now a little bit older, you guys need to launch an assault on Cairo. You guys need to launch an assault on Egypt and push back the Crusaders and then take more control away from Shawar. And Salahuddin, when he is told to then reapproach the Egyptian caliphate, he says that I answered that I was not prepared to forget the suffering I endured in Alexandria. My uncle then said to Nur-ad-Din, it is absolutely necessary that Yusuf goes with me. And Nur-ad-Din repeats his orders. I tried to explain the state of financial embarrassment in which I found myself in. He ordered that the money be given to me, and I had to go like a man being led off to his death. So he did not want to participate in the battle that was coming up, because the previous battle that he was in, it was very rough for him, and he experienced things that he hadn't experienced before, and he was very much woken up to the harsh reality of warfare, and so he did not want to put himself in that position again. But Nur-ad-Din orders it, and because of his uncle, he has to follow this order. And so he says that, I felt like I was a man being led off to my death. So once again, to reiterate that Salahuddin, the eventual legend that he would end up being, he was not always like this. He obviously had hesitation, he obviously had some type of, you could say potentially, some level of dislike towards warfare. Eventually, Shirkuh, with the help of Salahuddin, who is a little older now, so they are successful in pushing back the Crusaders, and they eventually take over control from Shawar as well. And to ensure that they don't repeat the same mistake in trusting Shawar again, what they do is they end up executing him after capturing him. And so, as a result, the caliph, the Fatimid caliph in Cairo, because he felt like his power was being taken away by Shawar, he then rewards Shirkuh as he rewards him by making him the vizier, by making him the prime minister of Egypt with him. So now all of a sudden, for having no power and influence in Egypt, Nur ad-Din now has essentially his right-hand man in charge, or second in power in Cairo. And this is a huge victory, and this is a huge development that had previously not occurred. So Shirkuh is now the vizier, but he was also somebody who was known to be very loose with his health issues, and he was someone that very much enjoyed eating and overeating. And it is said that 2 months after he becomes vizier, he engages in another one of his very heavy meals, and then he goes and has a bath, and then it is said perhaps he has a stroke or he has some type of reaction to this, and he passes away. He passes away. And so now, who becomes the vizier? Who do we make the prime minister of Egypt? Who do you think it is? Salahuddin. So he's hesitant in going to Egypt. In going back to fight against the Crusaders, and now all of a sudden he's been thrust into this position of leadership. One of the most influential and powerful people of the Fatimid Caliphate. And that's another thing to note. At this point, they are now serving 3 masters of sorts. So Salahuddin was under 3 people. He was under the Fatimids, okay? He was also under Nur ad-Din, and he's also under the Abbasid Caliph as well. So he was trying to balance all of these relationships. Once Salahuddin achieves this position, he takes it. He didn't want to take it, but he ends up taking it. And then he sees this as now an opportunity to serve the cause of Nur ad-Din, but then also to serve his own personal cause, which was developing, or which had been developing since he was a child. And this is the same cause as Nur ad-Din, which is to retake the Holy Land, to take on the Crusaders and win back Al-Quds. So he begins to consolidate his power and influence. First by expanding the military, getting more people active in the military, getting more of his own people, getting reinforcements from Syria as well. And he's a very generous person. He's not a person who is attached to the wealth that was now offered to him. He was giving away money to his soldiers. He was giving money to the people, to the average people, and they were very pleased with him. Now, eventually, Nur ad-Din recognizes that Salahuddin's influence is growing and growing and growing. And there are certain orders that Salahuddin isn't listening to Nur ad-Din about as he was previously. And so Nur ad-Din asks Salahuddin, you need to come to Damascus right now. Okay? I order you to come because I want to basically discuss things with you, and perhaps if one reads into the history, you could possibly extract that Nur ad-Din kind of wants to put Salahuddin in his place and say, Egypt is mine, I am in charge of Egypt, and I will do what I want in Egypt. You don't go do what you want to do. Now, some historians, they see this kind of interaction between Salahuddin and Nur ad-Din through, obviously, writings, through their letters that they were sending each other, as a potential moment of discord, as a potential moment of enmity between the two. But Dr. Ali Salabi, who is one of the biographers of Salahuddin, he mentions that this is very much not the case. And the argument that he puts forward is that when Nur ad-Din asks Salahuddin to come to Damascus, to come to Syria, the response of Salahuddin was simply, if I leave Egypt now, then the Fatimids are going to basically take back any of the influence that they lost, and potentially the Crusaders are going to come into Egypt and take over. And so I'm trying to grow my military presence here, I'm trying to grow my political influence and political power here as well, and I cannot come at this moment. So that was the reasoning that Dr. Ali Salabi gave, and he said that because of this reason, there was no discord, it was just a logistical issue for Salahuddin, such that he was not able to go and see Nuruddin. But others obviously play this off as, Salahuddin kind of being rebelling in a way against Nuruddin, and they were trying to, you could say, create drama where there was no necessary drama to this. With that being said, Nuruddin, it is said Nuruddin was preparing to come to Egypt himself, but tragedy struck. On the day of Eid, he falls ill, and 10 or so days later, after attracting this illness, he's not taking any medication, he's not taking any treatment, and it is said that he was someone that would not listen to anyone. Whatever he wanted to do, he would do it, regardless of what people would say. And so people were even shy to suggest things to him as well. And so after 10 or so days of suffering with this illness, Nuruddin passes away in the year 569 after Hijri, or 1174 CE. And so this is a big loss to the Muslim world at the time, because Nuruddin was very beloved by everyone and by any of the people wherever he went. And obviously, as somebody who had restored some level of izzah to the ummah at the time, the Muslims had a lot of hope in him, in being the one that would recapture Jerusalem, and in being the one that would restore the presence of the Muslims in the Holy Lands. But all hope was not lost. As you potentially would have heard last week, Salahuddin grew up in the presence of Nuruddin's family, and he was under these same influences. And so the mission that Nuruddin set out with was not over. His mission, what Allah had written for him to do, was over. But the mission, the objective, and the goals moved on to Salahuddin. And he understood this. With his now newfound influence, he understood that the power that I have been given is not through my own accord. What I have been given is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and if I do not use this for Allah's pleasure, then I'm going to be someone who is amongst the losers. I'm going to be somebody who is belittling the blessings that Allah has given me, belittling the blessing of power. And so, very beautiful quote when it comes to Salahuddin's, subhanAllah, relationship with Nuruddin. Sorry, pardon me. Okay, my apologies, I had the wrong document open. All right, so a very beautiful quote that was written by one of the chroniclers of Nuruddin and Salahuddin. He writes regarding the complementary nature and the relationship between Nuruddin and Salahuddin. He says, "By Allah, how good were these two kings. They came one after another with good conduct and pure hearts. One was Hanafi, the other was Shafi'i. May Allah heal by means of them everyone who is ailing. Nuruddin was the root of all that was goodness. By means of his justice and sheer character, he established security throughout his land, despite the prevalence of evil and injustice. And he gained control of the land that he needed to be able to continue his jihad. Thus, it became easier for the one who succeeded him to complete the course. But Salahuddin's achievements in jihad were greater, and he reached more lands and showed patience and perseverance, and Allah kept for him the greater victory, namely the conquest of the Holy Land. May Allah be pleased with them both, and as the poet says, how much the former left for the latter to do. And it is also said that they, referring to Nuruddin and Salahuddin, renewed Islam after it had declined and strengthened it after it had grown weak. Then Allah supported Islam after they were gone with Al-Malik Al-Zahir Rukn ad-Din, which is one of the relatives of Salahuddin. So they were two people that obviously Salahuddin was very much influenced by Nuruddin, but Nuruddin trusted Salahuddin to carry out certain tasks and certain missions for him. In the year prior to the death of Nuruddin, the father of Salahuddin passed away, Najmuddin, in the year 568 after Hijri. And it is said about Najmuddin, and this is a very important point for us to consider. It is said regarding Najmuddin, one of his biographers write, he was just and he was content. He was a just man and he was a content man. He kept the bonds of kinship and was known to give charity frequently. He performed voluntary prayers frequently and was greatly attached to the scholars and was inclined to virtuous people. There's not a lot that is written about Najmuddin. His contributions in certain political tasks is what was written about, but regarding him as a person, there's not a lot that is written about. But what you do find, especially in this one paragraph of 4 or 5 lines, are all these noble characteristics and qualities that he's remembered for. And these are obviously characteristics and qualities that were so apparent that people around him, when they thought of him, these were the things that they thought about. And so when we kind of look at this in the grand scheme of things, and especially the influence that this had on Salahuddin, you would have heard last week that Salahuddin obviously did not grow up particularly pious. He was just like the youth of his time. He was engaging in certain frivolous activities. But from his childhood, you could understand that given this description of his father, he was a just and content man, he was somebody who held on to his voluntary prayers, given this description, and obviously his father being involved with Nuruddin, him hearing discussions of Jerusalem, him hearing discussions of, we need to engage in resistance and we need to engage in this warfare against the Christians. Although as a child he may not have understood this, but just merely being in the presence of those discussions, right? Merely seeing the practice, the religious worship of his father. You can imagine the influence, the passive influence that this has on the child. That even though as a child or as a teenager or even as like a young adult, he did not necessarily implement this, this is what he saw growing up. And so in this is a lesson for those who are parents, obviously, and or those who are going to be parents, inshallah, that your practice, what your discussions with your spouse or with your family are, or your discussions with, your discussions in the environment of your children, what these discussions are, the subject of these discussions, are naturally going to have an impact on your child. If a 4 or 5-year-old is swearing, this is not because he heard it from by reading something. This is most likely because of the constant language that he's hearing in his household. And similarly, if a young child is, he's going to Quran, he's reading his Quran, okay, he's going to Islamic classes and the like, once again, this is because of the values that his parents are instilling in him. This is his parents showcasing to him what is important to us. And what is important to us, we want it to be important to you as well. This is a point of reflection for us. So eventually, at the loss of his father, and then the loss of Nuruddin, and then the loss of his uncle as well, Salahuddin is not completely isolated. Salahuddin at this point has matured, he's understood his role, he's understood the impact that he needs to have, and he takes this very, very seriously. So he begins to consolidate power in Egypt, as we mentioned, and once this becomes successful, he crushes any type of resistance from the Fatimid sympathizers, and he takes a full hold of Egypt. Once he's done this, he then sets his eyes not on Jerusalem just yet. He sets his eyes on the lands of Syria. Why? Why Syria? After the passing of Nur ad-Din, his territories that Nur ad-Din was in charge of was then distributed to his kids. And they were not obviously as strong in terms of politics and in terms of military to be able to manage the different factors that were going in regarding the governance of these territories. So unity was breaking and discord was spreading in the lands of Syria. And so Salahuddin's goal was, I've consolidated my power in Egypt. I now need to go to Syria and consolidate my power there as well. Because once again, if you have Syria and you have Egypt, it makes things much easier when you want to capture Al-Quds, when you want to capture the Holy Lands. Why? Because to the right of Jerusalem is Syria, and then down as well is Egypt. And so you are essentially surrounded, and obviously there's the coast. Those are the three sides. And so he begins his mission into Syria. And much like Nur ad-Din, he does not immediately take over the lands of Syria. He's actually met with quite a bit of resistance from the different Muslim sultans and the different Muslim rulers of the different territories. And so through diplomacy, sometimes through force, he either ends up negotiating with them. In some instances, he ends up leaving them alone completely, only to come back many years later and then take over. And then in other instances, he besieges until the people of the city force their ruler to give up and to surrender and to hand the reins of the city, to hand the reins of control of the city to Salahuddin. Now, we move to the years, or about a decade or so, before the conquest of Jerusalem. We are now between the years of 1175 to about 1180. All right. Now, not a lot happens during these years. A lot of these years is Salahuddin merely consolidating his power in Egypt and trying to consolidate his power in Syria. In addition to that, there are natural occurrences that are happening, environmental occurrences that are happening. For example, there's periods of drought that he has to deal with. So he's in Egypt, there's periods of drought, and so he can't really go to Syria. He's having to stay in Egypt, and he's dealing with all these different things that are going on. At the same time, there are the occasional raids by the Crusaders into Egypt or into Syria, and so he's having to defend these as well. So he's dealing with not major things, but things that are keeping him occupied away from his goal. And at the same time, this is allowing him to then really push forward the project that Nur ad-Din had began when it came to utilizing the institutes of the masses to revive the spirit of resistance and to revive the spirit of engaging in striving for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this education was being purported constantly over and over again in these madrasas. And he would utilize the preachers and he would utilize the ulama of the different areas that he was in charge of to once again reinforce this message. Because through the reinforcement of this message, the spirit lives on. These ideas live on inside the minds of the Muslims. And so when the time comes, when Salahuddin calls upon them that we need to march upon Jerusalem, the Muslims are ready. Because they know and they understand the true value behind this march. It means something to them because they've heard it so many times over and over again. In the year 1180 CE, a truce is signed between the king of Jerusalem at the time, Baldwin IV, or King Baldwin the Leper, as he was known as. He signs a treaty with Salahuddin, where basically, we're not going to attack you, you're not going to attack us. And there is a figure of the name Reynold. Reynold de Chatillon. Reynold de Chatillon, as he is called. Reynold de Chatillon, you could say, is, using modern language, was the most Islamophobic person of his time. He came with the Crusaders after the First Crusade, a couple of decades after the First Crusade, and his only intention was to just go into Muslim territory, pillage, take whatever he could of the war booty, and then just move on to the next territory and pillage that and destroy that. Eventually, he was captured and he was held in prison in Aleppo, in Halab, in Syria, for 16 years. And it was during this time that his hatred of Muslims and his hatred of Islam only grew. He didn't change an iota. In fact, it only further pushed him into his hatred. Eventually, he is released through some negotiations by the ruler of Aleppo at the time with the Crusaders. They negotiate some type of release, and in this, Renaud is free. Renaud learns of this treaty that is signed between Salahuddin and the king of Jerusalem, and he is very frustrated by this. He is very frustrated by this because now he is also bound by the treaty because his king has signed this treaty. And so his intention his goal and objective to just pillage and kill has been pushed back a little bit. But Renaud was someone that, despite some claiming him to be an intelligent person, he was not always someone who was fully in control of himself and in control of his urges. So he makes his intention to his people clear, that we are going to strike into the heartland of the Muslims. What does that mean? We are going to strike Medina, and we're going to go to Mecca as well. And we're going to take the fight to them, essentially. And so the task for him, it was a large task. It wasn't an easy feat, and he understood this. So he tests the waters. So in 1181, he raids a group of pilgrims that were going on their way from somewhere in Syria to Medina. So on this route, Renaud ambushes them, and he kills many of them. Many of the Muslims that were going on their way to perform pilgrimage. Salahuddin learns of this very quickly, and he sends a response. And so Renaud doesn't kill all the Muslims there, but he definitely causes a big damage. And from this, he understands that I need to be a bit more smart about this. And so he spends a few more months preparing, and he spends a few more months trying to re-strategize how he's going to do this. Now, historians mention this incident, and the truth of this is disputed by some, but it's something that Muslim writers use to their advantage. And so they claim that Renaud makes another one of his intentions clear, and he says that we're going to go to Medina, we're going to dig up the Prophet's body, and we're going to take it with us back to Jerusalem. And we're basically going to use this as a bargaining tool against the Muslims. Now, this claim is mentioned in many of the books that you may read regarding the Crusades and Salahuddin. However, some do dispute this in that, once again, they mention that Renaud was, despite being a fanatic, he was not someone that was necessarily dumb. He was aware of the different military logistics that involved with this. Where he was based, there is first of all hundreds of kilometers between him and Mecca and Medina, and any type of mobilization of an army of 100, perhaps even thousands of people marching in the direction of Mecca and Medina is going to ring huge alarm bells for Salahuddin. And so it's going to be an easy interception. So what Renaud actually thought of, and what he intended to do then was, okay, I can't mobilize an entire army, but what I can do is a raid, okay? With a small group of, you could say like an SAS, as one of the writers described it, an SAS-style raid, all right? I grab a couple of people with me, and we just go into one of the routes. Our objective is really just to pillage Muslims. That's our objective. And so wherever we find these Muslims, we'll just kill them and we'll take their stuff. And that's exactly what he did. I had the map up, I would show you what he did. But he gathers a group, not too large, a group of his crusaders, and he sails from where he is on what is, you could say, north of the Red Sea, okay, north of the Red Sea. He sails from there to a place called Aydab. And this is now along the coast of Egypt, very close to Sudan. He sails there, and there was a port in Aydab. And this is a port that would receive Muslims who were going either to Hajj and Umrah, or they were coming from Hajj and Umrah. So he sails there, and when he arrives there, this is a time of Muharram. Muharram is after Dhul Hijjah. What happens in Dhul Hijjah? What happens in Dhul Hijjah? Hajj. Okay? So the Muslims are coming from Hajj back into Egypt. And they're at this port. And Reynold arrives to this port. When he arrives to this port, you can only imagine what happens. He finds all these Muslims and he causes havoc, destroys whoever's there. But his bloodlust doesn't stop there. He then sails across to another location called Raghib or Raghib, I forget, the name slips my mind. And this is now along the coast of what is now modern-day Saudi Arabia. Once again, another port. And it is said that he was trying to go to Jeddah, but perhaps he lost his way. And when he reaches there, he does the exact same thing. Kills whoever he finds of pilgrims, and takes whatever of the booty or whatever of the possessions that they had. And this is a very big straw for Salahuddin that snaps. And it is at this instance Salahuddin then makes a vow. By Allah, I'm going to capture Reynold and I'm going to kill him. By Allah, I'm going to capture Reynold and I'm going to kill him. And this was one of the very few vows that Salahuddin would make. Now this raid that he conducts along the coast of what is modern-day Saudi Arabia is eventually also counted as well, and Reynold, very scathingly, he is one of the only survivors from this. And he makes his way back to his castle in the north of the Red Sea. Many of the people that were taken hostage from his army, it is said that, were executed, or pretty much all of them were executed. And the reason being was, if news got out that Reynold, or one of the Crusaders, had managed to basically penetrate into the lines of defense of the Muslims, very close to their holy cities, then this would call into question the strength and the authority of Salahuddin. And so if the people heard about this, then the people would begin to not just question, but potentially even rebel as well. So they wanted to quell any of this information and news that was spreading and make sure that there were no survivors from this. Now, this is taken care of. Reynold loses a bunch of his top army compatriots, and he takes his time to consolidate himself back into his castle. Now this occurs in 1183 or 578 after Hijrah. Now, between the next couple of years after this are once again a bit quiet again. Natural occurrences are happening. Salahuddin himself falls very, very sick to the point where he felt that he was going to die, and he dictates his will. There are issues that are once again springing up in Egypt and in Syria, and so he's trying to quell those as well. But in terms of the warfare against the Crusaders, there is not much development that is going on between 1183 and 1187. So these 4 years are relatively slow. In the same time period, there is issues in the Crusader camp as well. The king of Jerusalem, King Baldwin IV, one of his other titles is King Baldwin the Leper, eventually succumbs to his leprosy and he passes away. And so then an issue arises amongst the Crusaders as to who is going to replace him. And there is a split camp there as well. Eventually the person, or the child that is chosen, is not agreed upon, but then he too dies a year later as well. And so there is slowly division being caused amongst the Crusaders as well. 1186, the wife of Salahuddin dies, as he's also, once again, he's ill in this time period as well, and this slows him down as well. And then in 1187, Reynold once again attacks another group of pilgrims that are on their way to perform Hajj. And this one was a larger contingent of Muslims that were going, and Reynold, in his bloodlust, kills them all. And they're a very rich group as well, and so he takes a lot of their possessions as well. And this was then the straw that broke the camel's back. Once again, there was a treaty between the Crusaders and the Muslims, and Reynold has broken this again. And upon this, Salahuddin, after consolidating his power in Syria, consolidating his power in Egypt, he says, okay, that's enough. Something has to be done now. We must begin our march towards Jerusalem. And so he assembles his army, and this is one of the largest armies that has been formed so far. And a battle ensues. There is a body of water known as the Lake of Tiberias. And this is just by the border of what is Palestine and Syria, where the Golan Heights are. Okay? So this is like northern Syria. And this is just along the border of it. So over here, Salahuddin assembles his army, and they begin to camp in this area. And the Crusaders are alerted of this as well. Now, where the Muslims were located, it was a very strategic location. Why? Because they had access to water, they had access to their supply lines in Aleppo and in Syria as well. They were filled with resources. The Crusaders, however, were very far away from their resources, and they were lacking water, they were lacking access to clean water to feed their troops and to utilize for the feeding of their camels and horses as well. So they were already on the back foot. The Muslims realized this, and they tried to provoke the Crusaders into attacking. Eventually, the Crusaders, through the constraining of their circumstances, realized we either attack now or we are crushed by these Muslims. We have no other choice. And so then this battle occurs at a place called Hattin. Now, to summarize this battle, it did not go in the favor of the Crusaders at all. Like I said, they were very much depleted by their resources were depleted. They didn't have strong access to their supply lines, and the presence of the Muslims was overwhelming because they were eventually surrounding the Crusaders. The Muslims also took advantage of the dry and dead grass that the Crusaders were camping around, and they set fire to this. And so now they have to battle the smoke that is coming towards them as well. Eventually, a group of the Crusaders break away from the Crusaders, and they charge through Muslim lines, but not to attack Muslims, but to basically go past Muslims back to their castle. And this is one of the stronger contingents that was with the Crusaders. And this caused a weakening in the Crusader army. Eventually, the battle continues, Muslims are fighting, and there is so much bloodshed that occurs. But eventually, they are successful. And they are so successful in that they capture the king of Jerusalem that was made, King Guy, as his name was, as well as the very staunch enemy of the Muslims that had caused them much headache and much despair, and that was Renaud. Salahuddin ends up capturing Renaud. They don't kill him, at least yet, but what they do is they take the king of Jerusalem and they take Renaud together, and they bring him before Salahuddin. Salahuddin has a seat next to him, and he gets Renaud to sit. Sorry, not Renaud. He gets King Guy to sit next to him, and this is out of respect, because he's, despite being enemies, despite being at odds with this person, he's still the king at the end of the day. And so Salahuddin treats him in an equal manner, or as much as he can in an equal manner. And next to King Guy then sits Renaud. Despite not being invited to sit there, he sits there anyway. Now, one of the things that Renaud did when he was raiding these Muslim caravans, when the Muslims would ask for mercy from Renaud, they would ask, let us go, we won't harm you, we won't do anything, just let us leave as we are. Okay? Or they would call out for somebody to save them and protect them. Renaud would respond to them and he would taunt them and he would say that, call upon your Muhammad, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, call upon Muhammad to come and save you. Right? Where is your Muhammad to come and save you? And he would taunt them in this manner. And obviously Salahuddin had heard that this had happened. So when King of Jerusalem was next to Salahuddin and Renaud was next to him, Salahuddin orders his servants to bring ice and water for the King of Jerusalem. Okay? Now, as we mentioned, these guys were severely under-resourced when they were engaging in the Battle of Hittin. Okay? And so they were deprived of food, they were deprived of water, they had become incredibly lethargic, and they were very much bogged down by their circumstances. And so when they came to Salahuddin, they were very, very thirsty. And so Salahuddin recognized this and he asked for water to be brought for King Guy. He gives it to him, King Guy drinks as much as he can, and then without asking Salahuddin, he gives it to Renaud. Salahuddin doesn't say anything. Now, when a king gives somebody water, he offers something to someone, then this is a form of him extending his protection to them. So by Salahuddin doing this to King Guy, he's basically bringing him water and giving it to him. He's saying to King Guy that, I'm not going to kill you. I'm not going to harm you. You will be safe under my protection. But Salahuddin did not do the same for Renaud. He didn't say that for Renaud. So King Guy gives him water, and Salahuddin doesn't say anything. Salahuddin then goes to Renaud, and he says to him that he reminds him of what he had done to the Muslims. He reminded him that you have broken your truce multiple times that had been signed between myself and your king. You broke that truce. You killed all these innocent people. Basically, what do you have to say for yourself? So Renaud replies and he says, kings have always acted thus, and I did nothing more. In other words, he's considering himself as an equal to Salahuddin. He's considering himself to be a king. So he's saying, I've acted like any other king would. And so I've done nothing wrong. I did what I had to do. So Salahuddin, he then stands up and he says, here I am standing up for Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay? In response to the taunts of Renaud. And these taunts of Renaud, this is something that it reminds me of taunts that have actually been given to Muslims, that have been reported to being given to Muslims by the Chinese as they are torturing the Uyghurs. Many of the survivors from the Uyghur concentration camps have reported that when we get arrested and we get sent to these places, the guards that are there, as they're beating us, as they're doing whatever they're doing to us, they taunt us by saying, call upon your Muhammad, call upon your Allah, tell him to come save you. And the louder that they're screaming, the more these taunts are being repeated to them as well. So these things have not gone away. So Salahuddin, in response to the taunts of Renaud, he says, here I am standing up for Muhammad. And then he gives Reynold a chance. He says, you become Muslim or you face the sword. And the idea behind this is basically, because of all the destruction that you have caused, I cannot let you go as a free man. Because if I let you go as a free man, what are you going to do? You're just going to circle around, you're going to kill more Muslims. If you become a Muslim, then you are under my protection, I have no harm to you. Otherwise, there is no good for you to do. So those were the two options that were given to him. And so Reynold, once again in his arrogance, denied, refused, said a few more words to Salahuddin, and eventually Salahuddin struck his head off, and that was the end of Reynold de Chatillon. And so Salahuddin explains, he says, I vowed that I would kill him if I captured him. The first time was when he wanted to march to Mecca and Medina, and the second time was when he captured the caravan by means of treachery. And so Salahuddin was actually asked by the Caliph, the Abbasid Caliph, why did you do this? And Salahuddin responded, and he said that I made a vow. Okay, I swore by Allah and I took this oath twice, and so I had to fulfill my vow. Now, upon seeing this, King Guy, who was next to Reynold, was a little bewildered. He didn't know what was going on. He thought he was next. But as I said, by Salahuddin offering water to him, this was a sign of him then offering his protection to him as well. And so Salahuddin says to him, it is not the habit of kings to kill kings. But this man was killed because of his transgression and perfidy. In other words, basically because of his evil. And so now the king of Jerusalem is in the hands of the Muslims. The largest fanatic and largest anti-Muslim person that there was in the form of Reynold de Chatillon is no longer. A lot of the top generals that were with the Crusaders have either been captured or they've been killed in the Battle of Hittin. Jerusalem was now open for the taking. And Salahuddin recognized this. And so they marched towards Jerusalem, began. And on the 21st of Rajab, 583 after Hijri, or 26th of September, 1187 CE, the siege of Jerusalem begins. The Muslims surround the castle, surround the walls, and they begin launching with their trebuchets, stones, attacking the walls of the Crusaders. There was a barrage from both sides of arrows descending on each other. And Jerusalem at this time was filled to the brim, because many of the other Crusader cities that had fallen into the hands of the Muslims as they were coming on their way to Jerusalem, a lot of the, you could say, refugees from these places, they sought refuge in Jerusalem. So there was a lot of men, and there was a lot of women and children there. And so it is said that for every one man that was there were 50 women and children. So much of the inhabitants were not people that were fighters. But regardless, there was still some resistance that was put up. And some of the historians, they say that this was one of the most fiercest battles that had ever been fought. And to the magnitude that humanity had never seen such a battle like this. Salahuddin entrenched upon Jerusalem's walls relentlessly, attacking it, undermining the walls, and trying to create some type of opening such that they would then be able to charge inside. A week passes by, and eventually a gap emerges in one of the walls. The Muslims raise their banner and they push through this gap. And they begin to attack the soldiers. Not the people, not the average person, not any women, none of the children, just the soldiers, as is obviously fair in warfare. People fled to the churches, people fled to the places of worship, and it is also said that women would cut the hair of their daughters as a way to kind of rile up the emotion of the men around them to go and fight, because some of the men were also not wanting to fight. So women would do this to get the men around them to go and fight and to defend them. So in terms of military, things were in disarray. In terms of psychology of the people of Jerusalem, things were disarray. they knew that the end was close for them. And there was also another sentiment that existed in their minds. As we mentioned, when the Crusaders entered into Jerusalem in the first crusade, how did they enter into it? Did they enter into it with peace and serenity? Or did they enter into it with nothing but the intention to kill and rape and plunder it? Obviously the latter. And so, when the Muslims besieged Jerusalem, and the Muslims eventually made their way into the city, the inhabitants of the city, which at this time was primarily Christians, they thought the exact same thing was going to happen to them as well. But what happened? Did that happen? Did the Muslims act in the way the Christians did when they came into Jerusalem? No. Eventually, the siege stopped, and the Crusaders sent out a delegation to meet the Muslims, to try and reach some type of middle ground. And Salahuddin, initially, he refused, and he said that, no, we're going to continue fighting until we basically avenge what happened in the first crusade. But nonetheless, negotiations continued, and Salahuddin's kindness was reminded to him. So Balian, who was at the time in charge of Jerusalem, because the king was in the capture of Salahuddin, he is the one that is negotiating with Salahuddin. And they eventually come to a deal that every person in the city, all the Christians that are in the city, we will give them a safe passage out of the city. But they'll have to pay a certain level of ransom when they leave, and they must not return here. And we will not harm any of the children, we will not harm any of your women, everybody will be granted safety. Eventually, they come to this agreement, and the city of Jerusalem surrenders. Jerusalem surrenders. The Crusaders, in denial, but nonetheless accept that we have been defeated. And so almost a century after they had advanced and committed massacres upon massacres in this advancement towards the Holy Land, their stronghold of Jerusalem was once again back into the hands of the Muslims. And so on the 27th of Rajab, 583, 12th of October, 1178 CE, Jerusalem was finally handed over back to the Muslims, as it was in the time of Umar radiallahu anh. It was handed to Umar radiallahu anh, and now, once again, centuries later, it is handed back into the hands of Muslims to Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. And thus, the Crusaders had finally lost this stronghold and were forced to face the defeat that they were so ardently trying to avoid. Now, there's a couple of clips that I wanted to play that it seems like things haven't changed. A couple of clips from a movie called The Kingdom of Heaven. That is a dramatic retelling of this particular siege. It's obviously not 100% historically accurate, but it's still an interesting visualization to see just how Salahuddin is not just viewed, but some of the things that he did, how it appears in real life. Now, like I said, obviously when the Muslims eventually march into Jerusalem, they do not treat its inhabitants in the way that the Muslims had been treated previously. And this is once again from the mercy and the just nature of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. And in one of these negotiations between Balian and Salahuddin, it is depicted in the movie of Kingdom of Heaven. And so Balian, he says to Salahuddin that, we will not surrender, and we know that when you guys come in, that we basically know what you're going to do when you come in. And so before you do that, we will kill all the Muslim captives that we have, all the women, all the children, we will not spare anyone. and we will burn the city to the ground before you have your way with it. And he's implying that, and Salahuddin says that, I'm not going to treat you in the way that you treated us. Okay? And he says that, I am not those men. I am Salahuddin. Salahuddin. That's obviously the dramatic retelling. This did not historically happen, but it's still a pretty epic moment that occurs. But the idea is still the same. That Salahuddin understood that we are not, the teachers of the Crusaders are not our teachers. The ideology that the Crusaders followed is not our ideology as Muslims. Our leader, our guide is the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One of his names is Nabi Rahmah, the Prophet of Mercy. And so in the way the Prophet showed mercy towards his enemies and those who sought to kill him and destroy his mission, it is in the same way that Salahuddin reflected those values and those qualities. Now the story of Jerusalem does not end there, and the story of Salahuddin does not end there either. Salahuddin lives for a few more years, and another crusade occurs in this time as well. I've gone very much over time, so I'm going to stop there in regards to the story of the Crusades, and just mention a few lessons that we can very quickly derive from this entire saga of the Crusades. Now, the Crusades, keep in mind, did not stop there. The Crusades continued occurring for another 100 years after this. This is 1187. They continued all the way until 1292-ish. So there was approximately 8 or 9 Crusades in total that took place. And so some comment on this, and they say that the eventual Reformation that came in the church with Martin Luther and the Protestants, and then eventually after that the Enlightenment that took place in Europe, a lot of this was fueled by the people's frustration with the constant failure of the Crusades. So the only successful crusade that occurred was the first one. Every single crusade that occurred after, the Crusaders were met with humiliation and defeat after defeat. And the amount of money of the people that was utilized in funding these attempted conquests and crusades, it ran a lot of the resources of Europe dry. And so the people became and obviously this did not lead to any type of fruitful endeavor, because the Crusaders kept on losing and losing and losing. They kept on being defeated and humiliated each time they sent out a contingent. And so the people became very much disavowed with this, and they began to then wake up from the messaging of their ruling class, which was the Catholic Church at the time. And so they became less obedient towards the Catholic Church, and eventually the rebellions that took place, one can say, is because of their disdain and their disassociation with the Crusader sentiment. But with that being said, the Crusader sentiment did not end after the year 1292. The Crusader sentiment, okay, that we need to combat these Muslims, and we need to take back the Holy Land, and we need to spread the message of Christ via force, and we need to force people to love Jesus and all these types of things. The sentiment did not end in 1292. The sentiment, arguably, is what you could say spiritually fueled colonization that took place in 1700s and 1800s and 1900s. And this sentiment remains even to this day as well. The sentiment remains even to this day as well. Why do I say that? Not starting immediately of today, going back when colonization was first taking off, especially with the French, a lot of the French people that were engaging in colonization, they would say, their rhetoric was of such a nature that they would say that our current kings today that are engaging in you could say the conquest of Algeria and Morocco and the like, that they are the recoming and the new incarnations of King Louis. And King Louis was one of the Crusader kings of France. Okay, so they're using this type of rhetoric. They're using people from that time as inspiration to then fuel themselves into their colonization and conquest. A more explicit example is one of the Prime Ministers of Britain, William Gladstone. He's addressing his parliament, and it is said that he had a copy of the Quran in his hand, and this is like in the early 1900s. He had a copy of the Quran in his hands. And as he's talking to his parliament, he says to them that, so as long as this is in the hearts of the Egyptian people, we will never be able to defeat them. And shortly thereafter, after World War I, after the Ottoman Empire falls apart and they're having to give up their land, and of this land is obviously the land of Palestine, and the British take over the land of Palestine and becomes the British Mandate of Palestine. One of the generals of the British Army, he walks into Palestine, and he walks into Jerusalem. As he's walking in, it is said that he says, "Now the Crusades are over." Now the Crusades are over. Why? Because the British, who come from this heritage, the British participated in the Crusades of the time. They're coming from that heritage. Okay? And that ideology, like I said, that mindset, that sentiment, Crusader sentiment, it never went away. And so whatever they did in terms of military action, they were channeling, or you could say they were calling upon the memories of the heritage of the Crusades to feel them in what they were doing here. So this sentiment still exists. And just today, just this morning, I was trying to look for more types of quotes in this regard, and I find a book that is written by the current Secretary of Defense of the United States, Peter Hegseth, I believe his name is. So he has a book called The American Crusades. And in the second chapter of the book, he goes through different types of isms that are a threat to America, right? Communism, left-leaning liberalism. He goes through about 10, 11 of these isms. And at the very end of it is Islamism, right? And Islamism is the worst of all these isms. And this is the biggest threat to America. And he goes through this whole definition of, a moderate Muslim and then an Islamist. Okay? He doesn't really define what a moderate Muslim is, but he defines what an Islamist is. And so he says that basically, to those who follow the religion rigorously, referring to Islamists, the text of the Quran and the teachings of Muhammad ﷺ are infallible, inflexible, and unquestionable, making the text of Islam the real challenge. Almost every single Muslim child grows up listening to and learning to read from the Quran. Contrast this with our secular American schools, in which the Bible is nowhere to be found, and you'll understand why Muslims' worldview is more coherent than ours. Then he has a subheading called Our Crusader Moment. He says, our present moment is much like the 11th century. We don't want to fight, but like our fellow Christians 1,000 years ago, we must fight. Once again, Secretary of Defense, or as it's been rebranded as Secretary of War in the American government right now. We need an American crusade. We Christians, alongside our Jewish friends and their remarkable army in Israel, need to pick up the sword of unapologetic Americanism and defend ourselves. We must push Islamism back, culturally, politically, geographically, and in the case of evils such as the Islamic State, militarily. Okay? And this book is only written just a couple of years ago, like 2020. Once again, I'm mentioning this not as a form of fear-mongering or any type of vilification, but just so that we do not live under this idea that things are dandy, people shake our hands and smile at us. The sentiment exists. Obviously, we treat people with respect for as long as they're treating us with respect. But we as Muslims need to be a bit more critical-minded and a bit more cautious of the ideologies that are still present around us. That not everybody has the best interests, our best interests at their heart for us. So that's the first thing. Crusader sentiment still exists. The second thing that I would like to very quickly discuss is the importance of unity that was displayed in this story. Nur-ad-Din, before they embarked upon any type of conquest with the Crusaders, and Salahuddin after him, they didn't make any type of significant incursion into the lines of the Crusaders until they had properly unified and consolidated their power in the Muslim lands that they had. Now, obviously, our circumstances when it comes to unity are very different. This is not a call for military unity, but rather an understanding of the importance of unity in our communities. That if we are to display any type of strength when it comes to our political presence in these countries, or any type of influence in these communities, that we need to prioritize the needs of the community and the struggles of the community and the things that will cause advantage to the cause of the Muslims in our communities, rather than focusing on our own selfish gains. The issues that the Crusaders took advantage of, one of the issues that they took advantage of was the mass amounts of disunity that was in Muslim lands. What they achieved with the First Crusade only came about because of the disunity of the Muslims. And so, as I mentioned in my in the first talk, regarding history rhyming, right? History rhyming. That, when it comes to injustices, there are injustices that are rhymed throughout history, and the subject of the people of the injustice, the causes of them being at the hand, them having injustice being caused upon them, also rhymes as well. And one of these causes is disunity. So we need to think about the greater good of this ummah as much as we possibly can. And we need to prioritize the affairs of the ummah, the things that will advance the cause of this ummah before what our interests are and before what our own personal desires are. And the final thing that I will end off on now, inshallah. This has been mentioned a few times, but it is essential, because any type of true revival of ummatic spirit, any type of true progress that will come and success that will come to our ummah is if we, firstly as individuals, and then if individuals are acting, you could say, in a coherent manner, then this will have an impact on the community as well. And this is our devotion and our worship and our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This entire time, whatever success Nuruddin came about to him, whatever success came to Salahuddin, this entire time, they always acknowledged that this only came from Allah. It was only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that enabled these victories to us. At one time he was calling people to partake in the jihad. And he would implore them and he would tell them that, do not fight for my sake. Do not fight because I'm calling you. You are fighting for Islam. You are fighting for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That should be your intention, to fight for Allah, not because I'm calling upon you. So he would never try and attribute these things to himself. And he would always remind people of maintaining their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he was someone that led by example, right? He was known for his tahajjud. Nuruddin was known for his tahajjud. Nuruddin was known for his sitting with the scholars, his relationship with the scholars. They were known for their love of listening to hadith. Salahuddin and Nuruddin, it is said regarding both of them that they would invite the scholars to their courts and they would get the scholars to recite hadith to them, to read from the books of hadith to them. So these were people that were devoted. They were not people just of military genius and political prowess, but they were people of great spiritual means as well. So we must understand that وَلَا غَالِبْ إِلَّا اللَّهِ, that there is no victor except Allah. There is no way that this ummah is going to achieve any type of success unless we have a strong connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when I say connection, it's not just a connection of words, okay? It's not just a connection of belief. It is also a connection that comes through action as well. We as a ummah, we need to work on our acts of worship. We need to increase in not just the obligations, but we need to increase in the nawafil. We need to pray more. We need to wake up for tahajjud. We need to make a lot more dua. We need to have a deeper understanding of the Quran. And in addition to us doing this, to then spread this onto our families as well. When we have children, to keep them connected to the Quran. To make sure that our children are growing up with this idea that we are a part of an ummah. And our allegiance and our number one priority is to serve Islam. And it is to ensure that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's word is what is most supreme. And upon this I will conclude. I apologize for the hiccups at the start, and I apologize for going over time as a result of it. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to learn and to understand and to implement the lessons from the story of Salahuddin May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant this ummah another Salahuddin who will restore its izzah and who will advance the cause of Islam and who will revive the greatness that the ummah was once at. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us for our shortcomings. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the tawfiq to work for His cause. May Allah utilize us for His deen, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not replace us with others who will work for His cause. May Allah utilize us in whatever capacity that we can be utilized for. Allahumma ameen. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.